Good day, philosophers. In our last lecture, we were reflecting on the quote, "No craftsman ever makes errors," which seemed preposterous. But then we saw that for Plato, it fundamentally meant that when you make an error, you stop being that thing that you think you are. You know, you can't be a teacher when you're failing to be what a teacher is supposed to be if you're failing to teach, right? And so this led us to the idea that to be the reality of a thing, to be the true thing, you ultimately have to be in line with the definition in some kind of perfection. And that true definition of what something is, Plato called the Eidos, or the forms, right? It was the true perfect reality of what a thing really is. And all of us, we participate at best in the forms, right? More or less. If you want to be a plumber, you're not the perfection of what a plumber is. You're not the true form of a plumber. Instead, you're just a partial participant, imperfectly embodying at some moments what it means to be a plumber, and other times you're not, right? But in essence, is anyone truly a plumber in the most fundamental sense? We'll see for Plato, the answer is no. So we actually want to continue that idea now. And draw some more distinctions and really get to the metaphysical importance of this in Plato, because we're going to see this is a deep metaphysical idea. And I actually have a kind of preposterous statement written just beneath me there. Do you see? You see where I wrote just beneath there? It says, "You have never seen a triangle in your life." You might have caught that, and you have to be wondering, what do you mean I've never seen a triangle in my life? Like, what? That's craziness. Well, just think about this. Let me draw something. If I draw this, like, all right, there's that. There's a triangle, or well, I guess that's kind of a triangle. There's another triangle. I mean, it seems like I'm drawing triangles all over the place. I can see triangles, right? But the real question is, are any of these things actually triangles? What is a triangle? Okay, even if you see this, I look at this and I think triangle, but is it really a triangle? What is a triangle? Well, if you go back to geometry, right? A triangle is a subset. It's a type of polygon, right? And so we have these things called polygons. And what are polygons? Well, essentially they're closed figures constructed of line segments, more or less, right? And so number one, they have to be a closed figure, and they have to be constructed of line segments, right? And so then a triangle is a three-sided polygon. Okay, so that's nice. So for instance, closed figure, here's an example of a closed figure, right? That's not a polygon. Oop, well, you can't even see it. That's sort of like a circle-y type thing, right? It's closed, and that if I go all the way around, at least it appears to be closed, that there's no gaps there. But it's not constructed of line segments, and you could draw something that was like constructed of line segments but not closed. This guy would be constructed of line segments but not closed, so it's not a polygon, But a triangle is a three-sided polygon, so you would be like, well, okay, well then there you go. That's a triangle right there. There's a bunch of triangles, but well, let's be careful. Well, this guy right here, this guy's really big trouble, right? Because it's not really closed. There's a gap right there. And these things aren't really line segments, so that's trash, right? Maybe inside here, there's sort of a triangle, but I mean, if we get really close, I'm going to take a close look. Like if you get really close, you might notice that there's actually some little bits of gaps there and stuff. I mean, it's not actually truly what a triangle is, right? I mean, this is kind of like a triangle, and this is kind of a triangle, but none of them really fully fit the true definition of what a triangle is. Now you might be like, well, what if we had like a computer program, right? What if, boom, right? There's a computer generated triangle, right? Well, that's really a triangle. Now that's going to be perfect line segments. That's going to be perfectly closed. But even that isn't perfect. There's pixels in between, inside those line segments, and therefore there's little bits of gaps there. It's not the perfection of what it is. Now, when I look at that thing on the on the screen versus some of the drawings I drew here, I mean that thing on the screen looks and much more reminds me of what I really think of as a triangle, but but I have to admit it's not truly what a triangle is. And so here's what the takeaway, that in some sense you've never actually seen a triangle, not a real triangle, that is, right? Instead, what you've seen are things that remind you of a triangle, that more or less participate in what a triangle is. Remember that notion of participation from last class, that individuals that we experience in the world more or less participate in the true definition of what something is. And so each of these in some ways participates in the definition of a triangle. Even this guy participates in the definition of a triangle. When you look at it, you can see the triangle present there, right? And so in some sense, well, Plato is ultimately saying that if I'm going to really even try to understand anything about any of these things, I need to somehow see them in connection to their form, right? These guys, they all are participants. They participate in the form itself in some ways. And if I want to really get what these individual things are, I need to see them in connection to that form, which is itself something that is the true definition. It is the true reality of the thing, right? And so this gets a little bit interesting. I mean, this leads to some important metaphysical notions, right? Here's a work of art that's by an artist, Joseph Kossuth, and I don't actually know almost anything about him. I remember stumbling upon this on the internet years ago. And what we'll see here in this picture is three things, right? You'll see here on the wall. It's almost hard to read, but actually, if you could see this is actually a definition of something, right? It's the definition. It's written out as the definition of a chair, right? And the definition of a chair here is juxtaposed against over here on the wall, what is an image of a chair. In fact, an image of this chair, which is the chair right there, right? And what we ultimately see for Plato is that all of these things are interacting with one another, right? That and fundamentally, in the most real sense, the reality of a chair is the true definition of a chair itself. But the true definition of a chair itself shows up in all kinds of things that we observe. For instance, this actually observed chair that we encounter here, right, is not the only possible chair that exists. It is not the perfection or the true existence of all chairs. Just like this image here is just one possible image of this chair itself, this chair is just one possible image of the true definition of a chair. Now, one interesting thing here is that we see the true definition of a chair uttered in words, but we're going to see for Plato that the true definition, the true form of a chair isn't something that's verbal, isn't something that's spoken. It is in of itself this eternal reality. I mean, we can almost think about it like this. Here's a bunch of pictures of dogs. And all of these dogs are somehow connected to me. These two dogs over here on the left are just dogs that at some point in life we had babysat. And honestly, I don't even remember their names. But these two dogs in the middle, these are my two dogs right now. This is Wicker and this is Lucy. And this is a picture taken just a couple weeks ago when we did some camping over at Cape Henlopen in Delaware. And you can bring dogs there. And they had a great time swimming and going on the beach. Here's some other pictures. This over here is Bisou. He is a French bulldog owned by my sister-in-law, and he is just a bundle of energy, crazy energy, like constantly ready to go, like craziness. Actually, and this is an older picture of Lucy, the same dog right there when she was a puppy in a great snowstorm with some of my kids. But it's good times. So all of these things are dogs. All of these are dogs, but none of them is the true perfection of what a dog is. None of them is the actual form of a dog. They fall under the definition of what a dog is. They participate it more or less in their own particular kinds of ways, right? And so when we see none of them really is the full reality of what it means to be a dog, all of them possess some of the characteristics of being a dog, more or less, to some degree, in a way that Plato would argue is analogous to how each of these things is kind of a triangle, but only somehow like a triangle, not perfectly a triangle, not fully fitting into the definition. All right, let's just look at a quick text here, right? So if we go to the Republic, Book 5, and here we'll see how Plato, this is on my page 100, in our translations, text 173, looking at around marginal line 478E, and then 479A, right? when Plato looks at these things that we experience, right, he says that in some ways what they do is they participate, right? He says apparently it remains for us to find what partakes in both being and non-being, right? Being and not being. That in some ways that each of these dogs participate in being a dog and in not being a dog, insofar as they exemplify some characteristics but not in their fullness. Just like how a triangle here participates in being a triangle, but also not being a triangle, and that it's in between. It doesn't fully manifest what it is, right? And so if we look at, and just going down a little bit further here, we see Plato talking about the form of beauty itself and wondering about people who question the idea of a form of beauty itself, right? And so just remember in last class we talked about the beauty itself versus beautiful faces, and Plato says that when we go around and we look at the faces that we encounter in the world and the beautiful things that appear beautiful, he says that none of them really is the perfection of beauty itself, right? It says at best they participate in it. It says, "My very good fellow," we will say, "of all the many beautiful things, is there one that won't also seem ugly, or any just one that won't seem unjust, or any pious one that won't seem impious?" And Plato says that whenever we look at any particular example of anything that we observe, they show some aspect of it, but then they fail in others. Like, not every dog shows everything that it means to be a dog, and not every beautiful thing shows everything that it ought to be a beautiful thing, and they don't fully show what we're looking for, right? So if we look here, let's look at another text. This is page 169 if you have our translation. We also could look here at its marginal line 476a approximately, right? Here, again, Plato is talking about this idea of the forms. He says the same argument applies then to just and unjust, good and bad, and all the forms. Each of them is itself one thing, but because they appear all over the place in partnership with actions and bodies and with one another, each of them appears to be many things. So Plato suggests that there is really a form of what a dog is. There is a form of what a teacher is. There is a form of what a triangle is. And we see lots and lots of triangles. We see lots and lots of dogs. We see lots and lots of teachers and plumbers and all kinds of stuff. And he says for us, though, that's a mistaking if we think that the examples that we see are the true definitions themselves, that the things that fall under those categories really exist in some type of partnership, in some type of participation with that form. Right. And so I guess to better understand some of this, we're going to take a look here at something that's kind of famous. This is not the full rigorous account of what's known in Plato as the divided line. But let's talk about the divided line. So in Plato, he ultimately is carving up as a metaphysical distinction all of reality into two essential parts, right? As we talked about with the no craftsman ever errs, we've got like the true craftsman who is the true reality of things versus like the actual person that you'd meet that is just some imperfection. And that true craftsman is what Plato would call the eidos, the form of the thing, right? Versus all of us, which we are experienced things, or the dogs we encounter are experienced dogs. They are not the true real thing, right? So the eidos, or that form, as we said, in terms of a metaphysical distinction, is reality, is the real thing. The real things that we encounter are the reality is actually not what we encounter in our experience. The eidos, or the forms, are perfect. They are unchanging and therefore eternal. They are the fundamental true definitions of things. While the things we experience in life, they are images, just like time is an image of eternity. Everything that exists in time is an image of something eternal. Everything that exists in time is an image of a form, right? And we as being images of the real thing are imperfect and changing and temporal, right? We are at best only partial, limited manifestations of that true reality itself. Now, let's get that connection now, and let's connect it now to us trying to think about knowledge and trying to think about our ability to know and understand, right? So the only things that we can know, as we saw in the argument last class in the Cratylus, reflecting on Heraclitus and the like, that the true objects of knowledge, the only things we can actually know are things that are unchanging. And therefore, the only things we really can know are the forms, which are the fundamental true definitions of things. Again, not definitions in terms of words, but he thinks that there is an actual sort of perfect reality of these things that exist, not as a sentence, but as the reality itself. And then the things that we encounter, the things that we experience, are not reality. They are not that, and they are not fundamentally knowable. As he says, they're just objects of opinion and belief, right? And so, the best thing that we can do is try to find approximations of these things and try to understand how the things that we experience participate in the form. And so this gets kind of interesting too. Let's connect this to, like, say, even the idea of justice, right? So we talked about justice quite a bit throughout Plato's Republic, and we saw that Plato's concept of justice and justice in the city and justice in the soul had to do with each element doing its own job, doing its part, and being ruled by wisdom, right? But let's just think about justice in our world today, right? Most of the time when we think about justice, it's kind of like a justice that's supposed to be like righting a wrong, right? So for instance, imagine that someone took this class and like they just, out of complete frustration, they decided to like just, come over to my house. They found out where I lived and they completely trashed my computer, right? So like, be like, I'm sick of this online education, all this garbage. I'm going to destroy your computer, right? And so what would be justice there, right? If someone destroyed the computer, right? Now, that on one hand, you might say, well, at the very least, justice would be that person should maybe like buy a new computer, right? Buy a new computer. What else could be? Maybe there needs to be some kind of punishment as well too, right? To stop that person to help the person realize what they did was so terrible or something like that, or stop them from doing something like that. Maybe, what could an apology? Of course, I don't know. What's an apology worth if you were that mad? I don't know. But like, what really would justice be if someone sort of destroyed the computer? Well, in some ways, whatever justice is trying to be, justice is trying to sort of like right a wrong. But think about it. I mean, even if just say getting me a new computer, is that really going to right a wrong? Is that really going to fix things? I mean, there's a lot more that was lost than just the computer. I mean, I feel violated that someone came to my home to do something like this. And what else did I lose? Not only did I lose the computer, but I lost the time to be able to work on that computer. Perhaps I lost some of the things that were on that computer that are irretrievable, right? There's, in some ways, trying to right there is no way to really right the wrong. I mean, in some sense, as soon as someone has done this unjust act, there almost is like nothing that is truly just. There's nothing that is truly the just outcome, because the only way to really right the wrong is to somehow make it like the wrong never occurred at all. And so everything that we would try to think of as justice is just at most an image of justice, It's not the true reality itself. That if I think about really the world that we live in, the world of imperfect, changing, temporal, partial manifestations of the true reality itself, the true forms, in Plato's idea, we actually can't even see justice. Justice isn't present to us in any full sense for us to even really understand it. And so here's the idea that if I want to really know justice, I cannot know, I'm going to write this down again. Let me give it more space. I cannot know justice through examples. I cannot know justice through examples. And not just justice, anything. I can't know what fundamentally a dog is. I can't know fundamentally what a triangle is. I can't know any of these things because none of them are justice. None of them actually are that perfection, right? So for Plato, we can't learn what something is fundamentally through those examples because they aren't the reality itself. At most, they're partial manifestations, right? And so all we can have is, he'll ultimately say, is all we can have is opinion, right, about these things that are fundamentally constantly changing. All I can have are opinions about what would be the just reaction to someone sort of destroying the computer. There almost is no possible justice that could exist there. And so what do we really need to do? Oops, what is going on? Oh, there it's back. My webcam. I'm using my cell phone as a webcam, and it just like shut off for a second. Fundamentally, the only way that I could get to knowledge is I have to go beyond. Knowledge is only possible. Knowledge is only possible by grasping the forms. Grasping the forms. And how do we grasp the forms? Now, and fundamentally, that's a huge question that Plato doesn't really satisfactorily answer in some ways. He ultimately said that it's through some kind of recollection, that somehow we can reason to the forms, but it's much more complicated. It's not through perception, it's not through vision, it's not through smelling, it's not through any of our senses that will fundamentally get to the forms. It's only through some type of rational activity that we can get beyond this world, the world as we experience it, to the true reality of things, which is the world of the forms. Okay, so this is sounding a little bit weird, but this is his fundamental metaphysics and the epistemology that's based on it, right? So if we're going to try to really understand how do we know anything, again, it's based on grasping the definitions. We're re-seeing again what we saw before, but getting to those definitions means getting beyond and outside the world just as we experience it, right? And so Plato talks about in the Republic. Let's open up the book again. Let's go back to page 169 if you're using our translation with Reeve, right? And Plato starts to talk about two groups of people, right? He contrasts philosophers with what he considers sort of most people are like. He calls them, he says, most of us, we don't sit there and try to figure out and understand the true forms. We spend our lives looking and seeing and smelling and tasting and having opinions about the world as we experience it. And he calls us, the majority of us, lovers of sights and sounds, or lovers of seeing and hearing. And he contrasts that with people who are philosophers. So let's read the text here on page around 169. We're actually still around 476a now over to B. So Socrates says, Socrates says, the lovers of listening and seeing are passionately devoted to beautiful sounds, colors, shapes, and everything fashioned out of such things, right? But their thought is unable to see the nature of the beautiful itself or to be passionately devoted to it. Now, here he's not talking about just beauty. He's talking about all the forms altogether, but he's using beauty at the form of the beauty as the main example. So he continues, okay. He says, on the other hand, won't those who are able to approach the beautiful itself and see it by itself be rare? So notice that we actually have, once again, a kind of idea of the one versus the many. Most people just see, smell, touch, taste, and hear. All they do is experience the world as they experience it physically. But that, he says, is different from what just this a special few can do that can actually attend to beauty itself. Let's continue. He says, what about someone who believes in beautiful things, but does not believe in the beautiful itself and would not be able to follow anyone who tried to lead him to the knowledge of it? Do you think he is living in a dream or is he awake? Right? So that's a great question, right? He says that right now, let's reflect. Someone who only sees shadows, for lack of a better term, images of the real things and doesn't actually look at the reality itself. People who only see the images of real things versus reality. In other words, someone who's only focused on our experience of things rather than focused on trying to get to the true form or the true Eidos himself. He says, are they living in a dream or are they awake? What do you think his answer is going to be? Well, he continues, isn't it dreaming to think, let's see, whether asleep or awake, that a likeness is not a likeness, but rather the thing it is like? Right? It says, isn't like when you're dreaming, like in your half sleepy state, like you can imagine as a kid be like, oh, Dad, there's a monster in the corner. And you look, it's really like just your like a piece of clothing hanging on a chair. And just because of the darkness and your sleepiness, you look at that and you think that it's a monster, and it's not that at all, right? And so it just sort of kind of looked like a monster. And so he says that someone like that, they're sleepy, they're dreaming, right? So to only and for him, that's ultimately the same thing as someone who's only focused on experience. And because experience tells us only about these imperfect manifestations, these imperfect images of the true reality, which is the forms themselves. He says, I certainly think someone who does that is dreaming, right? But what about someone who, to take the opposite case, does believe in the beautiful itself, is able to observe both it and the things that participate it, and does not think that the participants are it, or that it is the participants? Do you think he is living in a dream or awake? And he says, he is very much awake. And so that is who the philosopher is for Plato. Look at how dirty my book is. That's gross. I've had this book forever. He says the philosopher, in some sense, as a lover of wisdom, is someone who seeks out reality itself, is not satisfied with shadows or images of reality. They try to get to these true, unchanging, eternal forms through some type of acts of reason, not fundamentally based on experience. And so this is Plato's fundamental idea of metaphysics and the epistemological consequence of it, right? And so fundamentally, when Socrates is looking at the result here, right, we see this is the very end of book 5, page 174. This is marginal lines, just about 479D or so. He says, so we have now discovered, it seems, that the majority of people's many conventional views about beauty and the rest are somehow rolling around between what is and between what is not and what purely is. And he says that's what we do. We live in a world that's rolling around between what truly is, the eternal being of the forms, and what is not, all the ways that we fail to exhibit and fail to manifest that idea of the forms. And so we are sort of a wandering in between, right? And he says, and ultimately, that we need to become like philosophers who seek the forms. So this is the essential idea, that essential way that Plato carves up reality itself. It says that the world that we live in is not reality. The world that we live in is actually just some type of partial manifestation of it that we'll never find. It is impossible for us to find true justice. It's impossible to find true triangles. It's even impossible for us to find a true dog in the world that we experience. The reality of things for him is something that's completely outside of our experience. It's not something that's words. The true definition is not a sentence. The true definition is this actually existing, unchanging, eternal form itself, right? And that's what we need to grasp. So it's just some crazy stuff. There's some interesting things for us to think about. It essentially it can be a challenge, and so we'll see Socrates' idea about this one more time in our final lecture for this module, where we're going to look at Plato's allegory of the cave from Book 7 of the Republic. And so I will talk to you guys in a next lecture. Have a beautiful day.